going on, you guys? This is JK, the Norwegian mystic. I just got done reading Carl Gustav Jung's The Undiscovered Self, written in 1957. I read it, I took notes on what I felt were the key takeaways. Thereupon, after, I looked up on YouTube some of the reviews and some of the summaries for two reasons. One, I didn't want to do it beforehand because I didn't want other people's interpretations to be filtering my perception of what was being read. And then two, I also wanted to see what other people were saying so that I didn't make a video that was just saying the exact same things. So, at the very beginning, he does take some time to set into context the dire situation of the political environment at that time. So, he also starts off by giving a pretty harsh critique of the masses, or what would be the normal individual that makes up the mass, and how little his capacity for self-reflection is. So he says things like, "The gift of reason and critical reflection is not one of man's outstanding peculiarities." That's pretty funny. And he says, "The so-called normal person possesses only a limited degree of self-knowledge." He says that man is an enigma to himself. And what he's talking about is kind of this idea of projection, yes, projecting onto other people your own kind of insecurities and complexes, but even more so than that, he says that the psyche is just geared to look outwards. I mean, all of our senses are that way, and there's obstacles that one has to deliberately overcome in order to self-reflect, because it's in the psyche's very nature to do otherwise, to look outwards instead of inwards. And he's addressing this book to the reader who has within him the potentiality to overcome this. Look, you can either take this arduous journey of introspection, or you can become like the masses. So we spend some time talking about how science is ineffective or inadequate at describing the average man, being that what they get from average is a statistical sense of the large group, and then taking what is the mean per se. So he says this into his approach: "If I want to understand an individual human being, I must lay aside all scientific knowledge of the average man and discard all theories in order to adopt a completely new and unprejudiced attitude. I can only approach the task of understanding with a free and open mind, whereas knowledge of man, or insight into human character, presupposes all sorts of knowledge about mankind in general." And then even furthermore, he begins to point out the blind spots of science, given what were the recent discoveries in quantum physics, where the scientific paradigm is still that the scientist likes to believe that he is completely independent of the experiment, that his involvement or interaction plays has no interference in the results. So I really like this. He talks about how the individual is not born, and then that his psyche is something that he has at his disposal to activate, he can choose whether he wants to, have it there or not, but rather that the individual is born and then pre-formed by the psyche. And he says, man is much more the victim of his psychic condition than its inventor. And I mean, if you want any proof of that for yourself, just go ahead and try to stop thinking altogether, or go ahead and try and know what your next thought is going to be. He says that most people confuse self-knowledge with knowledge about their ego self. And the ego self, the knowledge that has one about the ego self, is contributed from external social factors, in large, if not mainly, if not entirely. And so in reading this, I'm like, okay, I'm going to think of an example for myself. The first thing that I came up with was, I've been told I'm a good listener by a number of different people. I'm a good listener. And then it's like, okay, well, obviously I couldn't have come to that conclusion without social factors, so there's an example right there. He also says that the normal individual is subjected to an onslaught of shoulds and oughts that are brought onto him by modern advertisement. And let me repeat that this was 1957, so you can only imagine his horror in seeing the effectiveness of the advertising company. Literally billions and billions of dollars put into research and development to be able to trigger those most basic human emotions within you in order for you to buy something that you don't need in order to fuel the economy. That the reader is at risk of what he calls psychic infection and succumbing to mass consciousness, which is basically turning over your individual self to that of the state. And this is where it gets a little paradoxical, because continually he's kind of speaking of the state as merely an epiphenomenon of all the individuals. It's a concept. It's not even really there. But at the same time, he's talking about how the state takes over the individual, and then the individual succumbs to what the state finds to be most important, namely self-preservation. So the state, although be it this kind of abstract concept that isn't real in the sense that you can go put your finger on it, it nevertheless has an agenda, if nothing else, to stay alive. So Jung refers to a split that takes place within the individual, and this is the disintegration. And he says big domain of where this takes place is in conflict with the individual's best interest, in contrast to the collective, the state's best interest. These two things can be in sharp contrast. He also says that knowledge and faith in this day are irreconcilable. And then he also says that your instincts and your need to be proper are always at odds. And that's a very Freudian thing, of course. He also points this out, which I thought was rather clever, that if the state be a dictatorship, the dictator at the top is just as dispensable as any of the others, and he's just playing his role. He's just, that's his role as a cog in the machine, is being the head of a dictator state, but he's still subservient to the state. Or in the past, even the king was subservient to the ideals of God or what have you. So why is it then that the normal individual feels drawn to his devotion to the state? Why is it not just the exact opposite be the case? Well, Jung says that it appeals to an infantile mentality that we hold, one where we could be carefree, irresponsible of the outcome. We're just told what is good and what is true is given to us from the top down. And then he says here, the individual is increasingly deprived of the moral decision as how he should live his own life, and instead is ruled, fed, clothed, and educated. And in this sense of directing the individual as to what is good and what is true, the state takes the place of what used to be religion. And now Jung speaks of organized religion as not being the answer, because he says it takes responsibility or diminishes responsibility or takes it away completely from the individual. And that's the exact opposite of what Jung is advocating here. But he's saying that the role that religion played for the individual cannot be done away with entirely. He says that religion is an instinctive attitude peculiar to man, and its manifestations can be followed all through human history. Its evident purpose is to maintain the psychic balance. So he says, you can take away a man's God, but only to give him others in return. And then he has this going directly to the reader, like, hey, ask yourself this in all seriousness. He says to the reader, have I any religious experience and immediate relation to God, and hence that certainty which will keep me as an individual from dissolving into the crowd? So I mean, right there, he wants the reader to stop and be like, okay, after illustrating that this is what's needed, do I have that? And if not, well, it's a good thing to know that, for one. So towards the end here, he states that for the normal individual, their shadow, that is to say, those aspects about themselves which they deem or society deems as bad, unwanted, that it should be, if all possible, just done away with altogether. And he says that this is a mistake, and it's a mistake to approach it in that way, and it's an erroneous assumption that leads to trouble. The only one that can really recognize this is the psychologist. And of course, being that there's not one psychologist for every individual out there, this is the call to the individual to go through the arduous process of introspection, come out on the other side individuated, which, if my memory serves, was not something that he thought could be accomplished, but it was something that you would continually work towards. And if I was to take away a single quote to sum up the entirety of the book, it would be this one, found on page 56 here. It says, the salvation of the world consists in the salvation of the individual soul. Well, guys, I think that's about it for me today on The Undiscovered Self by C.G. Jung. Once again, I'm JK. I'm the Norwegian Mystic. This is my second video uploaded to YouTube under this channel, and I don't know entirely what the format will be, except I know it'll revolve around psychology and philosophy directed in the means of self-help, self-realization. I'm also a student of personal development. I like a lot of theology, a lot of spiritual things, and click subscribe, click like, and I'll see you on the next one.
Little bird can taught me how to sing.
Want to visit?